I am an African.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Africa for Dummies show. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being with us as usual. I think me and Zengi are very, very excited because of the Spotify rap that we had received. It's quite interesting that this is an African podcast, but to see where some of our listeners are coming from, it's quite interesting. I mean, number one was Germany, United Kingdom, France, Australia, United States, and Switzerland, which is which is quite interesting to quite see. As usual, joined by the co-host with the most, Zenge. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. How's everyone doing?
Yeah, yeah, it's good to be back, eh? And today
Mm,
it's not it doesn't happen very often that you get the opportunity to meet somebody who has achieved as many things as our guest has, and it's quite a star. I don't know what you call it, starstruck moment for me because I grew up watching him on TV all the time. This is it's really an honor to introduce our guest today. We're going to be discussing quite a lot. The former Vice President of Zambia, Dr. Nerves Mumba. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Nathan, and Zengia, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being with you today.
Thank you very much again for joining. Yeah, so just to start, as we said in the beginning, we have many different listeners from all over the world. Who is Dr. Nerves Mumba, and how did how was your journey? If you could just briefly describe it.
Well, my journey is basically an African journey, and especially for those that grew up in Africa, rural Africa, they will identify more with me than those of you that grew up maybe in the cities of Africa. I grew up like 800 kilometers away from the capital of Zambia, here in Lusaka, and so I have a very humble beginning. I come from a family of 12. I'm the 11th born, like Joseph, and my father was a civil servant. Worked for government as a district administrator, and also as a teacher and inspector of schools. So he basically was a civil servant. My mother was a housewife. In order to bring up all the 12 of us, she concentrated on making sure that her priority was her children. And they brought us in a Christian home, in a place where values were extremely important. My father was a disciplinarian. He wanted to make sure that, being a headmaster himself, he brought that trade in the house. So he never left his little stick. Of course, these days, teachers are not allowed to spank their children, but during those days, it was almost unimaginable that somebody can teach without a stick in their hands, because it was part of the teaching schedule. So we grew up under very strict, disciplinary programs, and I don't regret. And so, yes, I come from the northern part of my country. And I went to secondary school in one of the premier schools here in Zambia called the Hillcrest Technical Secondary School in Livingstone. At that time, it was one of the two top schools in the country. By God's grace, they made a mistake and managed to push me there as well. So I went to school there and graduated. Then I went to a college to study instrumentation with the mining industry. And then after that, I received what we call a call from God to preach, and ended up in Dallas, Texas, at the Bible College there for a number of years. Came back to Zambia, organized a church ministry called Victory Ministries, and became a leader from 1980 of Victory Ministries, which grew into an international church organization with dozens of churches in Zambia and many others around the world. But besides that, really, I spent most of my time on national television as a national evangelist, and having crusades across my country until I joined the political process in which I am involved currently. But yeah, I come from a Christian background, and but very, very humble background. And I'm glad to see what God has done through these 63 years of my life.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, a funny fun fact. It's funny how life comes full circle. I think one of my family members actually attended some of the crusades that you had, and actually used to tell me about how the crusades were and how big they were at that
I think they're
particular
very
time.
popular, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's it's quite amazing. But you mentioned, of course, how you were led to become a pastor and were at the pulpit, and so how do you move from the pulpit to becoming Zambia's um vice president? I ask this question because now a lot of things are happening in terms of, a lot of people are calling for a separation between the church and the state, or are trying, like, the lines are very blurred, especially when you see politicians that claim to be to follow the I can say Christianity, or the values of Christianity, but then on the other side are not doing those sort of things. So how did that journey
Mm.
happen, and how do you bring the two together?
Yeah, I think you have asked two fundamental questions, and let me try to separate them. First of all, you asked me how did I move from the pulpit into the politics? And then indirectly, you've also asked or raised an issue that how do you reconcile situations where somebody claims to follow the values of Christianity, but in real life they do not, demonstrate that in their daily lives. So, look, personally, my call into church work is what we call evangelism. I'm an evangelist by calling. To those that are not familiar with Christian lingo, that basically means, one of the fivefold ministries that the Bible talks about. There's an evangelist, there's a teacher, there's a prophet, there's an apostle, and all those are different offices within church work. My office is that of an evangelist. And really what it means is that I'll go into a very dark area where Christianity is not exercised or even known. And I will probably be one of the first people to take the light of the gospel to a darkened place. So my calling is that of going to a place where traditionally Christianity may not have been popular, and then introduce the message of Christ and what God can do in people's lives. And people respond to become Christians, a lot of them for the first time in their lives. And so that is what an evangelist does. A teacher stays at home and teaches Christians on how to live by Christian values and how to overcome daily problems. A pastor continues to look after the Christians week after week to make sure that their needs are met, their spiritual and physical needs are mitigated through teaching and preaching. So for me, my job is to take light where there is darkness. That's a very basic, dumbest way to explain it. Really, that, an evangelist takes light where there's darkness. And so how did I end up in politics? By the same calling. I became a political leader because I looked around for the darkest area of our society. And it was clear to me that one of the darkest areas of our society and our time, it's politics. Politics, it's called a dirty game, one of the darkest areas where truth is not premium, where honesty is not an issue that people aspire for. It's a place where human crookedness is demonstrated at its highest levels. So for me, it was the natural place to take the values of God and the values of Christianity to that area that lacks those values. So going into politics to me was not as complicated as certain people consider it to be. It was a natural drawing for me to go there, because that's exactly what God called me to do, to take light where it is dark. And I came to discover that the political world is where people lie, cheat, steal, and, just take advantage of others. And if we don't take the light there, we don't take morality and integrity there, then the people will continue to suffer. So basically, that's how I ended up in the political process. It's a long story. It's a story on its own that needs its own hour. But I think that explanation just shows you where my motivation came from. Now, you've raised another issue, which is extremely important, that, people claim to be Christians, but their output does not demonstrate that. First of all, you must understand that God, the Bible says, it takes the foolish things of this world to confound the wise. God chooses to use an ordinary human being to be his vessel and his servant to proclaim his message, but that does not make that vessel perfect. That vessel has shortcomings, that vessel has difficulties and battles that he's fighting, along the way, but he is called by God and separated to be God's instrument. And there's absolutely no preacher of the gospel who is 100% perfect. Not even the Pope is perfect. If somebody casts a light on the Pope's life, every detail, people stop going to their masses, because every human being has got challenges that he works through, and God works with us in order to release his message to the generation that we are responsible for. So yes, we are not perfect. No one is perfect, but God uses imperfect vessels in order to release his perfect word to an imperfect world.
Yeah, that's very enlightening, actually. And I picked up on one thing that you said in explaining why you got into politics. You talked about how it's the darkest place in our society, and how you felt an urge to fix it, or to provide your own brand of renewed politics and that type of idea. But in the darkness and the treachery and the cheatiness of politics, did you experience any of it? What were the biggest challenges, and perhaps more crudely, what was your lowest point in your political career? Could you just put us into your mind, into that time that you realized that, okay, this is terrible? Have you ever felt any moments in your political career where you felt like, okay, I'm done, let me just, this is not for me, let me just go back to what I love, back to the pulpit? You did mention how, politics has a reputation world over for being ruthless, a dirty game, not just in Zambia, but beyond, beyond our borders.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me make something very clear. Yes, everything that you've described about politics is true. A very ugly aspect of life, and it's that way because of people. Because politics is an abstract. You can't touch it, you can't see it. So when you talk about politics, you're really talking about people, their basic animal behavior that gets out when they're confronted with the possibility of power. When a human being and his basic human or animal instinct kick in, and there's a desire to have power, they throw all caution to the wind. So yeah, that is the position. So when you say what were the lowest moments what are the lowest moments that I can refer to? I don't know, it depends on what you're asking, because one would actually say there are more low points than high points, because you're dealing with a very spirit of baseness of the human person. But I think what surprised me and hurt me the most coming from the church, I came trusting that when somebody tells you something, they mean it. I came to discover in politics the opposite is true, that they'll look you into the eye and tell you what is considered truth and it's not true. And they do that in order to deceive you and in order to overtake you and gain advantage over you. So I think one of the most painful things that I went through was deceit. When you're working on a program together in the night, some of the people are having dark corner meetings to totally undo what they agreed on the previous night. And then by the time you realize it, it's a disaster. And so deceptiveness or people being unfaithful and truthful are some of the things that I've found very difficult to deal with. I am always looking for an opportunity to trust someone, to believe in what they're saying. And so when you're coming from that background, you actually hurt more than those who come with no expectations. Some of the lowest moments basically was when I took over the movement for multi-party democracy through a convention. And some people worked together to try to get the party away from me using unconstitutional means.
Sorry, so for our listeners, the Movement for Multi-Party Democracy, MMD, is the former ruling party of Zambia from 1991 to 2011. You can continue.
Yeah,
sorry,
so that's helpful. Thank you. So when I won that election, you know, some of the people just couldn't put their act together. They just felt that the pastor cannot be a president of a political party as big as the Movement for Multi-Party Democracy. So the program was put in place to remove me using unconstitutional means. And we went to court, you know, and won each time we went to court. And that's why I'm still president of MMD. But the road has been very, very torturous, very, very unforgiving, and it's a very thankless job. But I'm glad that we are on it, and our muscles have grown. We are now more focused, and we are using every lesson that we've learned to make sure that the future succumbs to that which God has called us to do, and in improving the quality of life of our people here in Zambia.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a question regarding, you know, you reached the second highest office in the land. You were essentially the spare president. You know, you're the vice president of Zambia. Yeah, I mean,
yeah. It just sounds funny.
You're the vice president of Zambia, and
I haven't heard that. I haven't heard that of spare president. But,
yes,
but we can work with that. We can work with.
Yeah, I mean, technically, I heard someone describe it like that. So, I mean, it must. Is there a sort of weight that comes on you? And you know, people in every profession and in every job that they're in, there's the sort of what do you call it when you have the when you don't feel like you're meant to be in a particular job? There's a word for it. There's a phrase.
The phrase imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome, yes. So with the weight of, say at that time our population was around maybe 10 million or so people. So you have all of those people who are looking up to you, and you are representing the entire country. Does it ever dawn on you that, you know, why am I here? And yeah, so just generally, how did you personally overcome self-doubt in these positions of enormous power and responsibility?
You know, it's a very good question. I think that it's a very humbling role to play. Like I've given you my background. I grew up in Chinsali, you know, where we never, you know, grew up without shoes on my feet and stuff like that. So I didn't grow up in a privileged place. So to open your eyes and you are sitting in the place of being vice president of a country, and when the president is out of the country, you're actually acting as head of state. Yeah, I think I would be lying if I don't say that there's a very cold feeling of fear, like, how did I get here? Can I even do this? So I think that humanness is necessary to remind you that power belongs to God. You didn't create it, it was given to you, and at some point it will be taken away from you. And this is a point that I think a lot of brothers and sisters in politics have not really wrapped their arms around, to realize that power is not yours. It is actually something given to you to exercise for a period of time. Afterwards, in the same way it was given to you, it will be taken away from you. So it is important for you to always be alive to that fact. Did I self-doubt myself? I think what has helped me is my background of knowing Christ as a Christian and a pastor. Whenever I doubt myself, I go back to the scriptures that really, you know, explain to me who I am, what I am in God, and that with God I can do anything. So I think that everyone who becomes something bigger than they ever thought has these flashes of fear and doubting yourself. But you know, with jobs like this, you are surrounded by, you know, if you are blessed by some of the smartest people that are going to guide you. And when you feel like you don't know what to do, you have a circle of people that are ready to stand with you, to help you, to guide you. And as long as you can leverage on their wisdom, their intelligence, and their brilliance, I think you succeed. But when you think that all the wisdom is resident in you alone, as president or vice president, these are the leaders that fail to perform, because God, in his own wisdom, refused to deposit everything in one individual. He chose to place it all over the place so that we can depend on each other for moving our homes forward. In other words, you're married, you have to listen to your wife, and your wife has to listen to the husband in order for the home to be managed well. It's the same with government. If a president believes that he can do it all by himself, he's going to fail, and is going to fail terribly. God places people around you for you to listen to them, to learn from them as they learn from you. So yes, it was an overwhelming experience, but God gave us the grace, and God gave me some of the smartest people to surround me during the time I was vice president.
Yeah, I think that's that's a really good answer. But yeah, just moving a little bit away from Zambian politics, I think you've played um a huge role not only in Zambia but also outside of the country as well. I think the most recent issue, or the most pressing issue that some of our fans also wanted to discuss, was of course the Zimbabwe August 2023 election, which was the second election that took place in Zimbabwe after the fall of Robert Mugabe. And your role as the SADC chair caused quite a bit of a stir, to say it like that, among the ruling party particularly. And of course, it met the applause of the opposition camp. So I don't know if you could shed some light on that and just speak on that as well.
Sorry, it's the SADC Chair Observer Mission for the
Oh, sorry
elections.
about that. My
Yeah.
mistake. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. That's what I was going to correct. Yeah, thank you so much, Zenge, for helping me there. No, I was not the SADC chair. I was SADC head of mission, particularly for the Zimbabwe election. I'm no longer, the head of mission, because that mission is over now. Yeah, I think that this experience that I had in Zimbabwe falls squarely in line with my call as an evangelist. When I got involved in in church work, I came in as an evangelist, taking the light to where darkness was. When I joined Zambian politics, my entire crusade is to bring morality and integrity in politics. So when the president of our country, President Hakainde Hichilema, asked me if I could represent SADC in Zimbabwe as a head of mission for the election this last August, I went there with really no agenda of any form. I had never played that role at that level before, and I had never led a SADC mission before. And so I was there with a very open heart. The instructions given to me were clear. Number one, never, as head of mission, you have 68 observers that are going to go with you. They are from the 16 different SADC countries. They came from different countries, 16 SADC countries, and I was heading that group. So this group was eventually distributed in all the provinces of Zimbabwe to do one specific job. And the job was basically to observe the election, nothing else. We didn't go there to change their constitution. We didn't go out there to make people vote a certain way. I personally didn't go there with any preferred candidate. That is why when I arrived in Zimbabwe, my team and I, the first call was on President Mnangagwa at State House. to go and listen to him on the preparedness for the election. Then after that, we met the opposition leader, Mr. Chamisa, and we listened to his story and the concerns that his team had. And all we were doing was take notes of what these stakeholders were doing. We eventually interviewed several people in Zimbabwe and institutions that had something to do with elections. And so our job was very, very clear and easy. Observe, and out of the observation, write a report of what you have observed and present that report to the Zimbabwean people and to the international community. So that was one of the easiest things I've done, because all they wanted us to do was to use our eyes and our ears, and then not challenge their constitution, not challenge their anything, but just make sure that they are conducting that election in accordance with their own laws that they have set for themselves, and also the electoral act that they have decided to put in place by themselves, and to ensure that the election is free and fair for all those that are participating. And so those were our areas of concern as we watched. So after the 68 observers from across the country came back to Harare and brought their reports, a team of 24 sat down to go through these reports and look at those areas that are common from all the corners of the country. And they formed the basis of the report. And in that report, we praised the Zimbabwean government and the Electoral Commission for things that they did right. But we also did raise deep concerns about things that were observed, not by Nerves Mumba, by the 68 observers that went across the country. We also highlighted those things that were done in contradiction to their own laws and electoral act, and also contrary or below the standards of the SADC principles and guidelines on democratic elections. So for us, we had three things, Nathan. Number one, we had to look at the constitution of Zimbabwe and ask ourselves as observers, are these elections taking place within the confines of this constitution? Two, we looked at the electoral act of Zimbabwe. Are these elections following the prescribed space on how elections should be conducted in Zimbabwe? Thirdly, we had our own little booklet, which is called Principles and Guidelines for Democratic Elections of SADC. And we compare what the report is saying from the different provinces to those three documents becoming the pillars around which we make determination. So when that was done, as leader of the SADC mission, I was given the odious responsibility to now read that report that was written by technocrats and the Secretariat of SADC, helped by our own drafting team that comprised of people from different countries, 16 countries. So basically, that's how you evolve the report. So that's all I did. I read the report, and I was very, very clear about the report, that it represented things that we observed on the ground. Unfortunately, Nathan and Zenge, the ruling party of Zimbabwe, ZANU, took great offense after we issued our report in Zimbabwe of the election, as we had observed it as SADC. Unfortunately, the ruling party found offense in predominantly in one sentence that said that the election of August in Zimbabwe, the 2023 election, fell short of the international democratic standards of an election, and also fell short of the SADC principles and guidelines. But they have been praised for areas in which they did well, especially that the election was conducted in an atmosphere of relative peace, with absolutely no notable violence, and we gave that to them. But I think that maybe it's because SADC has never questioned Zimbabwe before about any kind of sins that could have been committed during the election, that they found that SADC did them, deliberately did that. There was no intention to write a report that would injure Zimbabwe, all the Zimbabwean people. And to answer your question, it is for this reason that a lot of Zimbabweans, even if you go online today, welcomed our report with both hands, because they said time has come for Africa to start having true reflective reports that talk about the challenges that we face on the African continent. If we all hide our weaknesses and our failures, our inabilities to provide the very best product for our people, when and how are we going to improve? If somebody comes to your house and says, oh, there's a dead rat there in the corner, please remove it, and you hate him that is exposing my filth, I think then you don't love yourself. I think anybody who comes and tells me there's a problem in my house and gives me an opportunity to clean it up is my friend. And I think that SADC needs to move, and I know that it happens all over the world, but I think SADC needs to continue to be truthful, as that is the only way that we can improve the story of democracy in our region and on our continent. If we tell lies to each other and scratch each other at the back and tell them we are doing well when our people are dying, when our people are not able to express themselves, we are doing a great injustice, not to foreigners, but to ourselves. And Zimbabwe is a brother, and just like Zambia, I would not allow what I would hate to see happen in Zambia to happen in Zimbabwe, because we are neighbors and we are brothers. So what's good for Zambia is good for Zimbabwe and vice versa. So that is the story of Zimbabwe, and I'm very proud of the team that I worked with, one of the most intelligent collection of individuals, and very professional, and very, very proud of the team that worked with me on that election.
Yeah, no, I mean, you raised a very interesting point about being able to have constructive criticism of other African countries. And we've just seen an example of the backlash that one might receive in providing this type of criticism. And sort of the response was quite polarizing. But you also observed another election in Liberia that saw the incumbent president lose, and now he's a one-term president, at least for now, and we saw him accept defeat, George Weah accept defeat to Joseph Boakai, the former vice president of Liberia, and it was widely held as a peaceful transfer of power. But in the wider context of things, that's a bit of an exception right now in Africa, considering since 2021 we have had around 8 successful or attempted coups, in Niger, Mali, the whole Sahel belt. Even if we exclude Sudan, there's quite a lot of coups. And, you could almost draw yourself back into the 1970s and describe Africa, and then describe Africa now. It would sound the same: coups, military dictators, and so on and so forth. So, is democracy on the whole failing in Africa? Would you say it's failing because of what's going on, or do you think maybe we've got it wrong? And why exactly do you think young Africans are so enthusiastic about other alternatives like military military rule? You saw people running around the streets waving flags of France, waving flags of Russia, in these countries like Niger and Mali.
Well, first of all, you've asked 2 questions. Let me try to address myself. First of all, I want to agree with you that the Liberian election, yes, I led an observer mission there under the auspices of ASA, a very credible global organization doing an excellent job in monitoring elections, but also doing deep research on the processes of democracy on the continent of Africa. So I was very honored to lead that very prestigious organization to that effect. So it was very relieving for me after the experience in Zimbabwe, where my life was threatened, that I was going to be killed, and it was ugly.
Wow.
To go to another country where there was basically, in our search as we observed, there was absolutely you could not see any intention for anybody to rig the election. And I think maybe it's because Liberia has a very rough background of civil war. And I think the Liberians do not want to, play around with peace that they enjoy. And they ensured, and we need to salute the President, George Weah, for the manner in which he conducted himself. He really put absolutely no finger in there trying to manipulate the election. It is for that reason that an opposition person actually won the election, because George Weah did not try to manipulate it, at least from our own observations. And the Electoral Commission of Liberia was extremely exemplary. It was very healing to work with a country like that, which was determined to ensure that the will of the Liberian people was expressed at the ballot box. And we saw that happen. And the results were read out. And the final result, although there was a rerun, was that Vice President Boakai only won with 28,000 votes. And yet, President George Weah actually conceded defeat before the final votes were counted. And I think that is historic. And these are the success stories on the African continent, which is always described as a place of shambolic elections and criminality, corruption. Africans are no good. They are always looking for ways to destroy themselves. It's not the Africa we are about to experience now. I think that Liberia has made us proud. President George Weah has also made us proud, and we salute him. And the incoming president, his tone continues to encourage us, and we pray that that country shall make great progress. But you also, Zenge, raised another issue about the contrast in West Africa, where there are all these coups that are taking place. How does that relate to what happened in Liberia? And how does that speak to the state of democracy on the continent? I think my own experience in observing elections and running for political office myself as president in my country, there are many things that are at play. Democracy on the continent has been under threat for a long time. And Zambia, of course, stands out as a country that gives an example of countries that can move from one administration to the other peacefully. And so Zambia is a great success story on the continent, and we pray that it continues to be so. The reason why we feel there are coups happening in certain parts of the continent is that the young people are starting to lose confidence in the electoral processes. And that is why the report that was given in Zimbabwe by SADC and African Union, by the way, and European Union report were basically the same. We called out those areas that compromise the democratic process. And now in West Africa, we are noticing that they are realizing that democracy is not giving them what they are, putting into that election. In other words, when they vote, their vote is stolen, and the express will of the people in those countries is compromised and taken away, and therefore leaving very little option for these younger people to say, look, the only way to go is probably through coups. That is why some of us are such big voices on free and fair elections across the continent in order to forestall this lack of confidence that is now rising in electoral elections. And so I think that we need to work together to try to place back confidence and value in elections so that the younger generation do not have to use, terrible means in order to acquire political power, including military coups. I think that if you use military coups and you start to go in that direction, Africa is being taken back, dozens of years back, and we don't need that. Time to move forward is now, and we ask all the presidents or the leaders of the African countries to respect the will of their people in order to maintain peace and stability on the continent.
Yeah. Just to Zeng, if you don't mind, can I just add to that? A follow-up question would be, Because I think you've highlighted the importance of having free and fair elections and how the effect it can have on a democracy, basically. But I think there's some other people or economists that have suggested that perhaps um, democracy isn't the best model for, and just this is not something Africa for Dummies is saying or anyone is saying. I'm just saying I've heard this argument before, essentially that democracy isn't the best model for many African countries because um, it doesn't give enough time for sound decisions to be made, in the sense that decisions are made to essentially get reelected than to actually further develop the country. So number one, do you agree with that argument? And number two, do you think that democracy should still the way it's functioning, which is 4 years, another election, or should we come up with some sort of hybrid system or some other system that might take into consideration the current things that we are going through? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you see, let me be quick here. The Americans are very clear. Of course, they exercise democracy in elections and in other areas. You see that they do their very best to exercise the democratic tenets. But they don't call democracy as the final system of governance. They actually call democracy an experiment. Though, I'm a student of political science and I was trained in an American university. They call it an American experiment. So democracy is not necessarily the alpha and the omega of governance systems that is going to meet the aspirations of the people. I have a lot of questions on the effectiveness of the current system of democracy that we are using to govern ourselves. The only thing we have now is that this is the system that we have all agreed on by consensus, by which we govern ourselves. Is it perfect? No. Even the Americans decided they were not going to use it the way we use it in Africa, one man, one vote. They decided to go into electoral colleges, a college issue, so that it's not the one with the maximum popular vote that becomes president, but some system that really talks to the way their community and society is managed. And Africa must now come to a place where they say, thank you for this democracy we have used. If America can tweak it, we also can tweak it so that it meets our cultural and our aspirations as a people. And you've said it right. Sometimes, this whole thing is about winning the next election. So the quality of policies and decisions made by politicians is highly compromised because it's not to meet the needs of the people, but it's basically to win an election. So we need to integrate, to interrogate this. And I said to the Africans, let's not be afraid to put this question on the table. Is this the best way to govern ourselves moving forward? Is 5 years, 4 years enough for a president to roll out what they believe they can roll out for their people? These are questions that need to be constantly asked in order for us to keep improving ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary, I guess, of that question, because I think that especially now, as Zengi mentioned, the things that are going on in the continent, I think democracy has certainly been put to a lot of people are questioning whether democracy is something that, and I think the way you put it, I think we should be able to sort of adjust and tweak it. I think is something that's necessary. Just moving on to, I guess, another theme with regards to we just want to get an inside view of politics and how it works, because I think there is a sort of like outside inside. People don't understand how things function within. I think UNIP, which was the first pardon me. Oh, I thought that was. I think UNIP stayed, which was the first ruling party of Zambia, stayed in power for 27 years. The movement for multi-party democracy, your party, stayed in power for 20 years. The Patriotic Front stayed in power for 10 years, and UPND are currently in power now. The question would be, why do ruling parties collapse after leaving office in Zambia, or basically have these internal disagreements after leaving office? Essentially, we don't really see like in the US you have these basically two party systems that keep on going and have been going for multiple years. But
in many
in
places,
Zambia,
yeah.
so yeah, so in Zambia you sort of have, or in other African countries you have. Well, I think for most African countries, the party that led them to independence is still there. But with Zambia's case, you sort of see UNIP, then the next one comes in, then the next one comes in, and the next one, but you don't really see political power staying and maybe gunning for the next election.
I think there are several factors, and there's need for some scientific research on this matter. We can only assume, especially that being leader of the movement for multi-party democracy, I have a hands-on some kind of experience on this issue. One of the issues, and I'm not saying it's the only issue, that makes these former ruling parties struggle to survive after they lose power. One of the issues, first of all, depends on the leadership, the Superman, leadership, where one leader becomes almost a god. And therefore, once they're out of power and according to democratic requirements, they step aside and another president is elected. And the people just can't get over the fact that the previous leader is no longer leader. Some of those who used to eat off his hands are going to continue to push that he comes back and unsettles the democratically elected leader and try to go back into history and in the past. It happened to UNIP. Kenneth Kaunda stepped aside and they elected Kebi Musokotwane as a new president. Before long, he was ousted and a coup or arrangement that removed him from office to replace him again by President Kenneth Kaunda. That brought, a deterioration of the political party, and it has been very difficult for UNIP to rise. We come to our own situation, the movement for multi-party democracy. President Rupia Banda, who was the last one who led the party to that loss, stepped aside and resigned. And when another election was approaching after President Sata died, the former president decided to come back. But coming back to a party which already had a democratically elected president, decided to work with the systems that he left to oust the president. That was, in this case, myself. And they succeeded in ousting, removing me out of power so that President Rupia Banda can come back. And when we went to court, we won the election. But that destabilization injured the political party. The Zambians wanted to move on, and they were not patient enough to wait for us to solve our problems. But, they wanted to move on to something that is less dramatic. So that's how come the the PF under Michael Sata won the election and beat us. Because, or rather, no. I've gone ahead of myself. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So now we have the UPND that has taken over after PF lost the election. And the same thing is repeating itself. We are seeing that the former president, President Lungu, has indicated that he has decided to come back into politics. It's no rocket science. The same thing that happened to UNIP, the same thing that happened to MMD is definitely going to happen to, the PF. That's just the way it is. But that is one thing that has really, the internal problems are the ones that have caused that these former ruling parties are not able to perform well to return power in the manner that it happens in other countries.
Yeah, I think that's
Okay,
sorry, you can go ahead, Zengi. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that was super insightful. Now, from talking about parties that can't stay in power, let's just brush on, if you can talk about this real quick, leaders that overstay, if you like, in power. All right, so we've got the president of Equatorial Guinea, Teodoro Obiang, and he has been in power for about 40 years. Yoweri Museveni, Paul Biya, all of them have a single thing in common, and that's they have all been in power for 30 years at least, which is longer than the average age of an African today, which is 20. And
Yeah.
So basically, we just want to figure out, why is it that African leaders want to stay in power for so long, and why do they keep on changing their constitution and changing their terms for just to stay in power for as long as possible, considering they're just growing older and older in terms of the gap between the average African and the age of the leaders, you know. And the funny thing is, many of them come in as a young revolutionary, and then 50 years down the line, they're still there parroting the young revolutionary thing. So, what is this problem that we have with long overstays of power by certain individuals?
I used to answer that question differently when I was younger. I was just go out there and shoot at these long-serving leaders. But I've now come to discover the problem is not necessarily the length of time they stay in office. The failure of African governance and leadership is in the failure of the leaders to unselfishly provide leadership and provide for the citizens that voted for them. Zambia and Africa is not the only area that has had long-serving leaders, and now we have made it an African problem. I mean, look at the United Kingdom. We had Margaret Thatcher stayed there for a long time. The Queen herself stayed there for some 96 years. I mean, not 96 years, 70-something years. Then we have also, the German Chancellor, who stayed there. They don't have that kind of limits. And so it's not really necessarily the length of time, but it's failure to govern. So even if you govern for 4 or 5 years, according to the Constitution, and you don't have the love of the people you govern at heart, even the 2 years is too much. Even the 3 years is too much. Now, let me come to your concern. The Constitution says 5 years. Our position is that once the Constitution prescribes the period of time, I think that presidents must, respect that. And we take great issue with those presidents that want to extend their tenure just in order for them to remain in power without improving their countries, just for the sake of them being called president for the entire life that they live on this earth. So we think it's wrong. But time has come for us now to move our attention from just the 10 years to the quality of leadership in Africa, and also the respect of constitutional democracy in terms of what we agree on as a people. If we say it's 5 years, let's all agree that it's 5 years. If a need comes to increase that time, let it be the decision of the Zambian people or the people of that particular country, because they made the decision for 5 years. They can make the decision for 7 years. They can make the decision for 6 years, like in Liberia. They can make a decision for 20 years. But as long as it's a decision by the people, we do not have a problem with that. But we do have a problem with leaders that are really destroying their countries, and on the other hand, want to extend their tenure in office. And Africa must address this issue as quickly as possible, looking at the quality of leadership on our continent.
Yeah, that's an interesting angle. It's more so on the content of their leadership and governance rather than how long, for example, they're in power. And I think that argument could be probably a very good sort of justification for Paul Kagame's presidency, although even he is quite a polarizing figure with some people.
Yeah.
But I think now that we're talking about overstays and the quality of leadership, perhaps we can talk about corruption and greed. Mobutu Sese Seko is famous for his kleptocratic style, his beautiful mansions and palaces in the middle of forests, and flying in a Concorde to deliver pink champagne from France, whilst you have people in desperate poverty. So according to the UN, Africa loses about $50 billion a year in illicit financial flows. How accurate is this caricature of a corrupt African ruler? Is this an African problem? Is there something wrong with the way our politics is designed or our politicians are designed? What is this corruption problem that we seem to have and we can't really get over?
This is, Zambia, this is very limited time to deal with such a huge subject. But let me first of all start with some of the people that, you've mentioned Mobutu Sese Seko. The Bible says something about war is a nation that is led by a slave or somebody that has just come from a place of poverty, deprivation, and given the opportunity to have power. And a lot of people cannot handle power. For the first time, they are seeing money they have never seen in their lives, and they fail to govern. It's just a human problem of being corrupted. by too much power and too much money. And I think that it has been a problem not only for Africa, but it's a global problem. This issue of corruption by these leaders has become, unbearable in most parts of the world. So I think for us, the reason I got involved in the political process was under the suggestion of saying, is it possible that we change the narrative that in order for somebody to be a politician, he has to be a crook, he has to be corrupt, he has to be a thief, and that's what a politician should look like. I got into politics to challenge that status quo, that you can be a pastor who believes in the values of God, love, fairness, and justice, and lead the country where equitable delivery of goods and services to the citizens of that country becomes a priority, where you don't only favor those people who look like you, who speak your language, but you make sure you provide goods and services for all citizens, regardless of their tribe, their color, or their gender. And I think we're able to achieve that. But there's a problem on the African continent in particular. We do not place premium on credible leadership. In fact, we hate credible leadership because it stands in our way of corruption, of getting things through corrupt means. So the weaker the president they put in place, the better for them to steal. And therefore, leaders that who hold morals are usually under attack and, with assumed hatred against them, because people want a free-for-all system where if you want to steal, you just go there and steal, and there's no punishment for it. So I think that those statistics by the United Nations are correct. Africa has suffered from, siphoning money and resources from this continent, taking it to the Western world and stashing it there for in few dictators that will never live long enough to spend that money. And we need to interrogate that. But the African people must decide that when they go to the polls, they should not go to the polls with their bellies speaking. They should go to the polls with their hearts and their heads fully operational. Because if their heads are switched off because of some campaign songs and promises, we'll constantly face the same problem that we have faced year after year. As we move forward, I have been encouraging men and women of integrity to get involved in the political process so that they can start to offer quality leadership and leadership in fear of God. So basically for me, that will be my response, and to agree with the United Nations that yes, there is that problem of corruption.
I think that's sort of a good way to end it. I think a call for integrity amongst African people, African youth, because I think it shows how important that is, especially in developing or at least seeing the countries that we want to sort of see. So I think I hope for our listeners that was a very good show, and that you would got to see what it's like, I guess, sort of lifting the veil behind what occurs in African leadership. I don't know, Zengi, if you had any other points.
Yeah, no, I mean, this has been, I think Nathan was complaining that Zengi, I know you like politics so much, so don't geek out on this with all of your questions. But I've managed to, I've managed to squeeze in all the questions I wanted to ask, and pretty much the questions that people also had to ask, because people very excited about this one, and you are an incredibly prominent figure in Zambian politics, and now, of course, in African electoral politics. So yeah, I think we've gone across almost every aspect, and it's a lot of stuff to sit down and read about, and there's lots of rabbit holes we can just end up in. But yeah, it's been an enormous honor to have you on our podcast.
Thank you.
I am an African.